Some people measure their lives in milestones, weddings, new jobs, and long-awaited trips. I realized one day that I had been measuring mine in hours I gave away. 10 years of my calendar filled not with my own plans, but with the schedules of my children, Ethan and Clara, and their families. They had busy jobs, busy lives, and busy children, and somewhere along the way, I had become the solution for all of it. It began innocently enough. Ethan would call on a Friday evening asking if I could watch his boys for a couple of hours so he and Laura could grab dinner. I said yes, delighted to spend time with my grandsons. A few months later, Clara asked if I could take her girls while she ran errands. Again, I agreed. At first I felt needed, even useful, but those few hours turned into afternoons into full weekends, and weekends into holidays. My children never asked if I had plans. They assumed I didn't. When I mentioned a doctor's appointment or a lunch with friends, their voices slipped into disappointment as if I had broken an unspoken rule. Slowly my life shrank around theirs until I barely noticed its absence. The book club I once joined faded away because I missed too many meetings. The weekly walks with neighbors became rare because I was babysitting again. Even Christmas mornings became less about my quiet traditions and more about where I was expected to help. The truth is, I adored my grandchildren, their sticky hands, their endless questions, the way their faces lit up when they saw me. But love didn't erase the exhaustion. Love didn't repair the fact that I gave up dinners, concerts, even weekends away because family came first. Or at least, that's what Ethan and Clara liked to say when they needed me. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being Margaret and became a resource, the fallback babysitter, the safety net they leaned on. And the worst part was that I had let it happen. The realization hit me one Saturday when both Ethan and Clara called within the same hour, expecting me to cancel my plans yet again. That day, I was supposed to meet Marlene, my oldest friend, for dinner, and a jazz concert we had been anticipating for weeks. We had adored that pianist since our college days, and we dreamed of reliving that feeling. When Ethan called, his voice carried the familiar edge of urgency he always used to soften his requests. "Mom, I need a huge favor. Can you take the boys tonight? Laura's stuck at work, and Clara is already dropping off her girls, so you'll have all the cousins together. They'll keep each other busy." I hesitated. "Ethan, I have plans." He didn't miss a beat. "But it's just this once. You know how much Clara struggles with the twins, and the boys haven't seen you in over a week." The unspoken accusation hung in the air. How could I choose a concert over my grandchildren? I closed my eyes, watching the concert program fade in my mind. "Fine," I said, flatly. By evening, my living room was chaos blocks, clattering cartoons, blaring 4 small voices, clamoring for attention. Ethan and Clara dropped off their children with quick kisses and quicker excuses. "Thanks, Mom, you're a lifesaver," Ethan said on his way out. "You're super grandma," Clara added, as if the title came with a medal instead of aching knees. Neither noticed the way my shoulders sagged when the door closed, nor the text from Marlene that buzzed on my phone. "Wish you were here." By the time the children were asleep, the concert was long over. I was left with the hum of the dishwasher and the heavy realization that just this once had become the rule. Sunday night, after 2 days of refereeing toy arguments and coaxing vegetables into stubborn mouths, my house looked like a storm had swept through. I collapsed on the couch, my body aching, my mind buzzing with exhaustion. They had gone home, but their voices still echoed in my ears. For the first time in years, I wondered what it would feel like to do something entirely for myself. Almost without thinking, I opened my laptop and typed "Quiet Weekend Getaways, Oregon Coast." Up came glossy ads for overpriced resorts and quaint bed and breakfasts, but one link caught my eye. Ocean View Inn, off-season special rates. The photos were plain faded curtains, simple furniture, but beyond the small balcony stretched the wide, endless sea. The price was less than what I often spent on groceries for the kids during a weekend. My heart raced. 3 nights alone with no sticky fingers tugging at me. No calls of grandma. I'm hungry. No rushing to the store because someone forgot diapers. Just me, the ocean, and silence. Before doubt could strangle me, I clicked book now. My hand trembled as I entered my card number, as if someone might burst in and stop me. But when the confirmation page appeared, a weight lifted from my chest. 3 days of freedom. 3 days of being just Margaret again. I tucked the confirmation email into a hidden folder labeled Insurance Receipts, a place I knew Ethan and Clara would never check if they borrowed my laptop. It was absurd hiding my own plans from my own children, but experience had taught me they would find a way to make it about them. For the first time in years, I was planning something without asking permission or arranging my life around theirs. I intended to keep my secret safe until the day I left. But during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I let my guard down. Clara complained about how restless her kids had been, and I murmured, a few days by the ocean would do wonders for that. Ethan perked up immediately. The ocean? Wait, are you going somewhere? My fork froze. Just a little trip, I said quickly. Nothing fancy. That was all they needed. You should have told us, Clara's face lit up. We could make it a family trip. The kids would love the beach. Ethan grinned. We'll rent a big house. You can watch the grandkids while we relax. It'll be perfect. I shook my head, trying to explain. This was meant to be quiet, just me. My mother chimed in before I could finish. Oh, Margaret, family memories matter more than alone time. You'll have plenty of years for quiet once the kids are grown. My father nodded. Think of the joy you'd bring them. You've always been the glue of this family. I felt cornered. The image of sandcastles and sticky sunscreen replacing my quiet mornings made my stomach twist. Ethan was already on his phone scrolling through rental listings. We'll find something near where you're staying. You can still have your view, just with a little company. Clara clapped her hands. This is going to be so much fun. My parents smiled proudly. I forced a smile too, though inside I was already calculating how to keep them away from my sanctuary. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my original booking. The thought of them trailing along, turning my quiet escape into another babysitting marathon, was unbearable. With a deep breath, I clicked cancel reservation. Then I searched again. This time, I chose something farther, something they could never stumble upon, a small island resort off the southern coast. The photos showed palm trees arching over turquoise water hammocks, swaying in the shade, and a narrow beach that promised solitude. The price was higher, but the promise of silence was worth it. I booked the ticket, printed the confirmation, and tucked it into a drawer under old tax forms. Ethan and Clara never suspected. In the days that followed, their excitement grew. They called to discuss rentals menus and which days they'd get adult time while I kept the grandkids busy. It'll be great for them, Ethan said, and for us too. We haven't had a real break in forever, Mom, Clara added brightly. They'll remember this trip forever. You'll keep them busy, and we can finally relax. Each word chipped away at my guilt. They weren't talking about shared memories. They were talking about childcare neatly wrapped as a vacation. I began rehearsing my planned pack-light walk with them to the airport. Smile, excuse myself at security, and then slip away to my gate. By the time they realized I'd be gone. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the days ahead. I was counting down. This time, my time would remain mine. The morning of departure arrived with an eerie calm that settled deep in my chest. For years, I had felt like I was moving through life on borrowed time, rushing from one demand to another. But that day, as I zipped my suitcase shut, I felt as though I had finally stepped into a life that belonged only to me. When I reached the airport with Ethan, Clara, and their families, I plastered on a smile. The children tugged at my sleeves, sticky hands leaving faint prints on my blouse as they buzzed with excitement about the trip to the beach. I hugged each one tightly, memorizing their little voices, but told myself that from now on, those hugs would not come at the expense of my sanity. We moved together through the check-in area, the noise of the airport swelling around us. Ethan chattered about the week ahead, Clara made a mental checklist of snacks and sunscreen, and their children argued over who got to hold the stuffed dolphin. At the fork where the lines split towards security, I gently touched Ethan's arm. "I'm just going to duck into the restroom before we go through," I said casually, my smile easy. "I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded without suspicion, already distracted with boarding passes and carry-ons. I turned and slipped into the flow of people moving in the opposite direction. My heart pounded each step, carrying me farther from the years of routine, the unspoken obligations that had kept me chained. At Terminal C, I approached a different airline's counter and slid my passport and ticket across the desk. The agent smiled and handed back my boarding pass to the island. For the first time that morning, my hands steadied. The security line moved quickly, and within minutes, I was walking down a jet bridge, the hum of the plane's engines filling me with a quiet thrill. Once in my seat, I allowed myself a single message to my family. "I'm not coming with you. I'm taking my own trip. Enjoy yours." Then I powered down my phone before I could see their replies. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I imagined the scene unfolding at theirs. Ethan glancing at his phone, Clara frowning, my parents exchanging sharp looks of disbelief. The image made my pulse quicken, but instead of dread, I felt something dangerously close to joy. The plane lifted into the sky clouds, drifting past like soft walls between me and the life I was leaving behind. With each passing mile, the weight I had carried for years loosened. By the time we leveled out, I felt nothing but the hum of freedom in my chest. When the island came into view hours later, its turquoise waters glittering in the sun, I nearly wept. The air smelled different there, soft and warm, threaded with salt. From the moment I stepped off the small ferry that carried us from the mainland, my shoulders dropped in a way they hadn't in years. My room was modest, just a bed that faced the balcony, but it felt like paradise. Through the open door, I could hear the rhythmic wash of waves. That first night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the horizon melt into gold. No voices called my name. No one asked for juice boxes or diapers or snacks. It was just me, the ocean, and the silence I had been starving for. The next morning, sunlight poured across the room. I slept until nearly midday, something I hadn't done in decades. I stretched unhurried, then wandered down to the narrow beach. My toes sank into warm sand as the surf tugged gently at my ankles. The hours passed with nothing but a novel in my lap, iced tea by my side, and the slow arc of the sun overhead. I had forgotten what it felt like for time to be mine. On the second day, I joined a small snorkeling tour. The guide's laughter was bright, echoing across the water as we slipped beneath the surface. The sea was clear enough that I could see the silver dart of fish, quick flashes of light that surrounded me. I surfaced laughing into my snorkel, startled by the sound of my own joy. Later, I shared dinner with 2 women from the group, strangers who knew nothing about me beyond the fact that I was traveling alone. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by what I gave to others. I was simply Margaret again. That night, I glanced at the hotel's safe, where I had locked away my phone. I thought about turning it on, checking for messages, maybe an apology, maybe anger, maybe silence. But I closed the safe again. Whatever waited could wait a little longer. My trip was mine alone, and I wasn't going to let their voices intrude. On the last morning, the tide was low enough that I could hear the ripple of waves brushing the shore. I finally gave in to curiosity and unlocked the safe. The screen of my phone lit up in a flood of notifications, missed calls in the triple digits, unread texts, stacked one after another, voicemails so many I had to scroll. The first text was from Ethan Unbelievable. "You're selfish. You ruined everything." The next was harsher. "The kids cried all day. You don't care about anyone but yourself." My mother's messages were a mix of scolding and melodrama. "You owe your family an apology. We raised you better than this." My father's were shorter, but just as pointed. "Call us now." I listened to one voicemail, then another. Ethan's voice clipped and angry. Clara's shrill and accusing. My mother sobbing as though my absence was a wound she could parade for sympathy. Through all of it, not one note of concern for whether I was safe or well. It wasn't my health that worried them. It was the disruption of the system they had come to depend on. I powered off the phone and slid it back into the safe. The storm could wait. 2 hours later, I was at the airport boarding my flight home. As the engines roared to life, I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. I wasn't afraid of what waited anymore. For the first time, I was steady. When I returned home, only 3 hours passed before the pounding began on my door. Ethan and Clara stood there, their children tugging at their hands, their faces flushed with anger, rehearsed on the drive over. They didn't bother with greetings. "You betrayed the family," Ethan said flatly. "Do you know what you put us through?" Clara's voice rose sharp and indignant. "You left us stranded. The kids were devastated. You ruined the trip. The least you can do is pay us back for your ticket." I let their words wash over me without reaction. Silence unsettled them more than yelling ever could. When they finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "I don't owe you anything. Not money, not babysitting, not my weekends, nothing." They both started to argue, but I raised a hand. "Until you can treat me with respect, I'm not available. This isn't up for debate." Shock crossed their faces. Ethan blinked as though he hadn't heard me correctly. Clara's mouth opened and closed, searching for an insult. The disbelief almost made the years of lost evenings worth it. They left in a rush of muttered complaints, their children trailing behind them. When the door clicked shut, the silence in my apartment felt like a clean slate. For the first time in years, the quiet wasn't heavy. It was freedom. The weeks that followed brought a stillness I hadn't known in years. For so long, my calendar had been dictated by Ethan's late shifts or Clara's errands by soccer practices and school pickups that weren't even mine to manage. Now the pages of my planner stayed blank, and instead of panic, I felt relief. Some mornings, I woke and lay in bed, listening to the hum of the city outside my window, marveling that no one was waiting for me to appear. I cooked what I wanted when I wanted. I walked through the farmer's market on Saturdays, lingering over tomatoes without worrying about rushing home for nap time. I bought fresh bread just because it smelled good. A month later, I signed the lease on a small apartment in a neighboring town. It wasn't grand, just a modest one-bedroom with a narrow balcony, but it felt mine in a way my old home never had. The balcony was barely big enough for a chair and a potted plant, yet I spent hours there, watching the street below, sipping coffee that no one interrupted. I didn't tell Ethan or Clara my new address. If they needed me, they could call, and if I didn't feel like answering, I wouldn't. I picked up painting again, something I hadn't touched since before the grandchildren were born. At first, my hands trembled, unused to the brushes, but soon colors bled onto the canvas, rough landscapes and wildflowers that reflected a freedom I couldn't put into words. Saturday mornings became my time to explore, sometimes a drive to the coast, sometimes just a long walk through quiet streets. Once, I booked a small inn for a night on a whim, sitting by myself in a restaurant without needing to leave halfway through to clean up spilled juice. The waiter asked if I was traveling alone, and instead of feeling embarrassed, I smiled and said, "Yes, and I like it." Guilt visited me in quiet hours. I thought of the children and wondered if they missed me, if Ethan and Clara painted me as selfish, the grandmother who had abandoned them. Sometimes I'd see a child in the grocery store tugging at their mother's hand and feel a pang sharp enough to stop me mid-step. But then I remembered the chaos, the endless demands, the way my needs had always been the last consideration. The guilt would fade, retreating like a tide, leaving behind the steady calm of conviction. Ethan called once a week after I moved. His voice was stiff. "The boys want to know when you'll come over." I hesitated. "Not right now, Ethan. I'm busy." Silence stretched before he muttered, "You've changed." I almost laughed. Of course I had. I had finally remembered who I was. Clara tried too, sending a curt message. "The girls miss you. Don't punish them for our mistakes." I didn't respond. For once, I didn't explain or justify. I let the silence speak for itself. My parents weren't any kinder. My mother left long voicemails about family duty, about how I had always been the glue that held everyone together. "What will people think if you keep acting this way?" she demanded. My father's words were sharper. "You're selfish. You don't abandon family." I deleted them without finishing. I no longer wanted to measure my worth by their approval. It was strange how quickly the world adjusted when I stepped back. At first, I expected constant calls, desperate requests, manipulations cloaked in guilt. But gradually, the silence grew. Ethan and Clara found other solutions. Neighbors hired babysitters each other. Their voices no longer filled my evenings, and though I knew they simmered with resentment, I also knew they were learning what I had always known: life continues even without me to hold it together. I filled my walls with my paintings. I joined a book club again, laughing when someone spilled wine on the rug, and realizing how much I'd missed the simple company of peers. I even went to a small concert with Marlene, the friend I had let down so many times before. She squeezed my hand as the pianist played, whispering, "I'm glad you came." And I realized I wasn't just attending, I was present, truly there, not half distracted by the thought of children waiting at home. One afternoon, I drove to the coast, the same stretch of ocean I had first dreamed of visiting. The waves crashed against the rocks, the sky wide and clean above me. I walked the shoreline alone, my shoes dangling from one hand, the salt wind tangling my hair. I thought of the trip I had taken months earlier, the island that had given me my first taste of freedom, and realized I had carried that ocean back with me. The sound of waves lived inside me now, steady and enduring. Ethan and Clara appeared less in my life, their messages less frequent. Sometimes I wondered if the distance would ever close, if they would ever see me as more than the woman who existed to make their lives easier. But I no longer felt the need to chase reconciliation. The choice was theirs to make. I had made mine. I wasn't sure if I would ever return to the role I once played, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would never again surrender myself so completely. My time was mine, and I intended to keep it that way. The seasons shifted around me, each one marking a new rhythm I had created for myself. Spring brought blossoms that scattered across sidewalks, and I painted them in bursts of pink and white on canvas after canvas. Summer gave me long evenings on my balcony, sipping iced tea, while fireflies blinked in the garden below. Autumn covered the streets in gold, and I walked through them slowly, crunching leaves beneath my shoes, without worrying about who might need me back home. Winter, once a time of frantic family demands, became quiet mornings of coffee and novels, my own traditions blooming in the silence. Ethan and Clara never stopped trying to break through the walls I had built, though the frequency waned. There were still messages, sometimes sharp, sometimes pleading. "The boys miss you. You're hurting the girls. Why are you punishing us?" They never seemed to ask the more important questions. They didn't ask what I wanted, or what I needed, or how they might meet me halfway. Their words carried the same assumption as always, that I was there to serve, to fill their gaps, to give, until I disappeared. Each message I read, then deleted a quiet affirmation that I had chosen rightly. The grandchildren remained the hardest part. Sometimes at the market or the library, I caught glimpses of other grandmothers holding small hands, and a pang of longing would ripple through me. I missed their laughter, their sticky fingers, their wide-eyed stories about school and dreams. But I also remembered the exhaustion, the way joy had been drowned out by endless demands. Love alone couldn't fix the imbalance. What I wanted was not absence, but respect, and until that existed, distance was necessary. It was Marlene who reminded me of the power of saying yes to myself. One Saturday, she called out of breath with excitement. "They've announced another concert, our pianist, the one we missed before. 2 tickets. Come with me." There was a pause, the old version of me whispering excuses about family obligations, about children and guilt. But then I laughed. "Yes, I'll be there." And I was. We sat together in the warm glow of the theater, the music rising around us, and I realized I wasn't just catching up on lost experiences. I was building new ones that belonged wholly to me. By then, I had grown used to neighbors waving from balconies to clerks at the market recognizing my face. In my new town, I wasn't defined by my role in someone else's life. I was simply Evelyn, the woman who painted, who loved jazz, who walked the streets with a gentle smile. The identity I had fought to reclaim had become something steady, something unshakable. Months passed before Ethan appeared again, unannounced. He stood at the edge of my new garden, thinner than I remembered, his face tight with the weight of disappointment. "Mom," he said quietly, "the boys miss you. They don't understand why you won't come around." I studied him for a long moment. The man who had once been my little boy. "I miss them too," I admitted. His eyes brightened, hope flickering. But then I added, "I will see them when you can respect my boundaries. Until then, I cannot return to the way things were." His shoulders slumped. He nodded once, then walked away. For the first time, I didn't feel hollow watching him leave. I felt steady. Clara tried a similar approach weeks later, showing up with her girls in tow, their eyes wide with curiosity. She framed it as an accident, a nearby errand that led them to my door. But when she tried to hand me a diaper bag and slip out for her errands, I stopped her. "No, Clara. If you want me to visit, I will. But I am not your free babysitter anymore." Her lips pressed tight, frustration flashing across her face. She gathered the girls and left without another word. I stood at the window afterward, watching them walk down the street, and though my heart ached, I knew I had done what was necessary. The more I held my ground, the more I saw clearly. For years, I had believed sacrifice was proof of love. That giving away my time, my body, my joy, was what kept the family strong. But true love, I realized, doesn't demand self-erasure. It makes space for both giving and receiving. It honors the individual as much as the relationship. By refusing to disappear, I wasn't abandoning my family. I was teaching them the value of boundaries, of respect, of balance. Whether they learned the lesson was no longer mine to control. In the quiet of my evenings, I often reflected on the journey, from the exhaustion of constant caregiving to the bold choice of disappearing onto an island to this life. Now, a smaller home, a simpler routine, a steadier heart. Freedom hadn't come in one grand moment. It had arrived slowly in choices layered one upon another. Saying no, booking a trip, signing a new lease, picking up a paintbrush. Each small act, a seed that grew into a new life. One spring morning, I stood on my balcony watching the sunrise spill across the rooftops. The world was soft with light, and for the first time, I understood something deeply. The truest inheritance I could leave my children and grandchildren wasn't money or weekends of babysitting. It was the example of a life lived with dignity. A reminder that it is never too late to reclaim yourself, to choose joy, to protect your own time. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this. Love is not measured in how much you give away, but in how well you honor yourself while giving. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges that allow real respect to flow. And dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed, chosen, and held no matter who tries to take it away. So to anyone listening, anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own family, remember this. Your time is not worthless. Your presence is not endless. You are not a resource to be drained. You are a life to be lived. Never let anyone make you forget that. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If it moved you, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to support more stories like this.